Hello there, Phil 353 Theory of Knowledge students. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the issues that Feldman discusses in Chapter 8 of our textbook, Epistemology and Science. This is going to be the first, hopefully short, video on this, and then slightly longer second one on this topic. And I'm looking here, I have no slides for this one, but I'm looking here at a two-page handout that I've made available to you as well, handout 17, I think we're up to, on epistemology and science and what we're going to call naturalized epistemology. And before I get started on this, I'm going to have a look here at the beginning of Chapter 8, where Feldman discusses something that he's calling the naturalistic view. Okay, so if you remember, over and above all the very specific theoretical views that we've been talking about, we've been thinking mostly in terms of this general view that we've called the standard view, right? The standard view says that we have a lot of knowledge in a variety of categories, knowledge about history, our immediate environment, science, and so forth, and that our sources of knowledge are perception and testimony and memory and things like this. Okay, and we've looked at a challenge to that view, challenge to the standard view, based on skepticism. So the skeptical view. This is going to be a little bit different. Okay, here Feldman characterizes the naturalistic view as the view that science should play a much more significant role in epistemology than advocates of the standard view have traditionally given it. So that's sort of the main way of thinking about it. Science should play a much more significant role in epistemology. In this video, I'm going to discuss this first issue. Okay, so the implications of some research results that seem to show that people systematically reason badly, and perhaps no less than the standard view suggests. Okay, next time I'm going to talk about this second issue. Okay, and in that video, something called naturalistic epistemology. Naturalistic epistemology is basically an approach that emphasizes applying the methods and theories from the empirical sciences to the philosophical study of knowledge, and in particular from cognitive psychology, perhaps evolutionary psychology. And it contrasts with really the approach that we've been doing so far this semester. The naturalistic approach contrasts with approaches that emphasize conceptual analysis, or insist on a theory of knowledge that's independent of the particular scientific details of how the brain works. Okay, and if you think about it, we really haven't been talking about how the brain works so far this semester. Okay, so, oops. I'm going to review with you some little cases here, okay? In fact, I'm going to didn't prepare this as well as I should have, perhaps. White that out for the time being. Maybe I'll white that out. But I'm not going to start over. Okay. Okay, so we're looking at a perspective here according to which in epistemology we shouldn't merely think about concepts like knowledge and justification from the armchair, right? From sitting in our armchair in an a priori way. Our work, the idea is, needs to be informed by the sciences, and in particular cognitive psychology. And there's a lot of empirical evidence that people are kind of far less rational than we might normally think. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about a few studies that show this. Here's one called the selection test. These are all basically results of studies undertaken by cognitive psychologists. So I have 4 cards here, okay? Card number 1 has a E, card number 2 has K, card number 3 has the number 4, card number 4 has number 7 on it. And we're told that each card has a letter on one side and a number on the other. Okay, And the task is as follows. Which cards must you turn over to see the other side to find out if there are any violations of this rule? Okay, what rule? Well, here's the rule. If a card has a vowel on one side, then it has an even number on the other side. Okay, so which card or cards must you turn over to find out if there are any violations of this rule? The rule being that if a card has a vowel on one side, then it has an even number on the other side. Okay. In fact, most people give mistaken answers on this task. In fact, fewer than 5% of people, respondents to this a study like this, answer correctly. Okay. Well, by the way, I urge you to pause this, especially if you didn't do the reading, to pause this and think about that. You have to turn over card number 1, okay? Because card number 1 has a vowel on one side. So if there were an odd number on the other side of that, we would have a violation of the rule. And you have to turn over card number 4, okay? Because there's an odd number on card number 4, so if that had a vowel on the other side, it would be a violation of the rule. Okay, but in fact, you do not have to turn over card number 2 or card number 3 in this case, because no matter what is on the other side of each of those cards, there's going to be no violation of the rule. Okay, so the answer to the task, correct answer, is card number 1 and card number 4. Okay, and in fact, fewer than 5% of people who do this answer correctly. Okay, here's another study. Linda the bank teller. So here the idea is that we're given an initial description of a person, and we're supposed to rank the likelihood of several propositions about that person. So given the description of Linda, rank the following in order of the probability that they're true. Okay, here, I'll give you the description of Linda. You ready? Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy in college, and she was heavily involved in issues concerning discrimination and social justice. Okay, that's Linda. Given this description, people who take this study are asked to rank, in order of the probability that they're true, the following statements. And you see them here. Linda is active in the feminist movement. Linda is a bank teller. And C, Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. Okay, so you could pause and think about that. How would you rank those 3 statements in order of the probability that they're true, like from most probable to least probable? Okay, well, interestingly, most people rank C the most probable, which it simply cannot be. Okay, statement C is a conjunction. Basically, statement C says that A and B are both true. Okay, the probability that 2 things are both true simply cannot be higher than the probability that one of them is true by itself. Okay, so the experimenters here were not interested in kind of the relative probability, the relative frequencies that people would answer A and B. It's the idea here is that people are giving an answer here that is just incompatible with simple probability theory. The probability that 2 things are true simply can't be higher than each thing individually. Okay, so that's another bit of evidence of human irrationality. Okay, well, just one more. For a randomly chosen word, order the following from most probable to least probable. Okay, frequencies of letters. So we have 4 alternatives here. Okay, so number 1 is that R is the first letter of the randomly chosen word. Number 2 is that K is the third letter. Number 3 is that R is the third letter. And number 4 is that K is the first letter. Okay, randomly chosen word, order them from most probable to least probable. Okay, well, again here, we have evidence of irrationality. Many people put 1 ahead of 3. Okay, so 1 ahead of 3. Many people think that it's more probable that R is the first letter than it is the third letter of a word. Okay, and many people put 4 ahead of 2. Okay, so the idea is that most people who do this say that it's more probable that the word is going to have K as a first letter instead of a third letter, or R as a first letter instead of a third letter. Okay, and in fact, it's the other way around in both places. And the idea here is this is sometimes called selective memory bias. We when you're thinking of a randomly chosen word and you see these R's and K's here, you're going to think words like rabbit and race and kernel of corn, whatever, king. You're gonna remember words where these have the R's and the K's in the first letter place rather than in the third letter place, and that's going to bias your judgment. That's why you're going to think it's more likely that the word is going to have the R as the first letter, R as the third letter. Okay, so that's, again, people mostly get the wrong answers on these tasks. Okay, Feldman has us consider an argument, okay, that people who take the naturalistic view might be willing to give on the basis of these studies in cognitive psychology, okay? And I'm not going to spend too much time on it, just sort of, he has a lot of interesting discussion here, but, so premise 1 says that people frequently give incorrect and unreasonable answers to questions such as the above. And you remember those. And this is a simple modus ponens argument. Premise 2 says, if premise 1 is true, so if people frequently do give the wrong and unreasonable answers to questions such as those above, then people are significantly irrational, and we conclude, therefore, that people are significantly irrational. Okay. I have a little bit of additional material here, since Feldman doesn't explicitly say this, but the idea here is supposed to be a challenge to the standard view, so I gave here a little stage 2 of the argument, okay? So the sub-conclusion up there on line 3 says, we're significantly irrational, okay? So I put a premise 4 saying, if that's the case, if people are significantly irrational, then we know less than the standard view suggests. The idea would be that we get things wrong so often that even when we get things right, it's incorrect to say that we really have knowledge in those cases. Okay, so we know a lot less than the standard view suggests, and then by modus ponens again, we know less than the standard view suggests. So this is sort of a challenge to the standard view from taking a look at empirical work in psychology. Okay, there's a lot of interesting things I think that could be said here, but I'm not going to go too deeply into these. I'm just going to kind of invite you to kind of think about most of them for yourself. Okay, but with respect to this people are irrational argument, does it really show that we know a lot less or less than the standard view suggests? Okay, the standard view it's not crystal clear itself about how much we actually know, but it says we know a lot of things in a wide variety of categories about our immediate environment, the past, science, the future, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So I'd like to kind of run through just a few possible objections to this argument. And by the way, these are not necessarily exclusive. More than one of these objections might have some bite to it. Okay. So one objection here is an objection to premise 1 of the argument. Okay, so this is directed to premise 1. Premise 1 says that people frequently give incorrect and unreasonable answers to questions such as the above, and the goal here is, according to this objection, is to show that the answers people typically give are not really that unreasonable. Okay, so we might support this objection by saying that, well, people sometimes might misunderstand the questions, but but maybe that might not be their fault. So if you think about this question up here, the experimenters are talking about probability here, and then they're sort of saying, oh, people are getting the wrong answer here on the basis of the probability calculus, probability theory. But maybe when most people read that, maybe instead of thinking of numerical probability, maybe they're really thinking of, oh, like which of these is kind of the best ending to the story about Linda, right? So, and maybe that's really not so unreasonable. Okay, so maybe technically the people might misunderstand the question, but it might not be their fault. It might be the experimenter's fault, and it's in any case not such an unreasonable thing to think about that question. Okay, so we might think that even though the answers are incorrect, they're really not all that unreasonable. Okay, so premise 1 says they're both incorrect and unreasonable. We might think that after all, if you're going to show that people are irrational, they have to not only be the wrong answers, but really be unreasonable answers. So is this a good objection to kind of all of these cases? Well, I'm not so sure, but there might be some good reason to think that a lot of these answers that people typically give are really not unreasonable answers to the questions that they're being asked. Okay. Another objection is an objection to premise 2. Okay. So premise 2 basically says that if the answers are incorrect and unreasonable, it follows that people are significantly irrational. And the goal of the objection to premise 2 is to show that failing to give good answers to these in these tasks is really not evidence of widespread significant irrationality. And there seems to be something to this because it's really unclear. I mean, think about the 3 experiments. One, which card do you have to turn over to see if there's a violation of the rule, or ranking statements in terms of how probable they are. It's really not at all clear how many of our beliefs about the world are going to be affected by the sorts of errors discussed here. Okay, the sorts of errors discussed here, it's not at all clear that they're going to reveal widespread and systematic errors that are significant enough to undermine the standard view. Okay, and by the way, I don't know if you remember this. People actually don't do so well on these cards, right? But you might remember Feldman noted if we make the experiment exactly the same structurally, but a little bit more familiar, then people do a lot better. So if we put like beer and Coca-Cola on one card and 17 years old and 22 years old on another card, and ask which card do you have to turn over to see if there's a violation of the rule, like if you're drinking alcohol, then you're over 21. People do a lot better on that when the content, the subject matter is more familiar. Okay, so it might not be so clear that if people give incorrect and unreasonable answers here, then people are significantly irrational. Okay. Okay. So there's good reason to believe that this argument it draws conclusions about these experiments that are too far-reaching. Okay. I put in a stage 2 of this argument. Okay. Maybe suppose that the first stage of the argument is right. Suppose that people are significantly irrational. Does it follow from that we know less than the standard view suggests? I'm not at all sure that that's clear either. Okay. There's an objection to premise 4. Maybe significant irrationality doesn't really undermine the standard view. Okay. Significant irrationality of the sort demonstrated by those experiments has to do with dealing with conditionals, if-then statements, right? If there's a vowel, then there's an even number on the other side, and probabilities, and relative frequencies of letters of words, it's not at all clear that even if we are irrational in these ways, that we know less than the standard view suggests. Think about it. I mean, a lot of what the standard view suggests is that we have a lot of knowledge about what's going on in our environment. You know, you look around, you see the stuff on your table, your desk, or stuff around you, your clothes. You know what you're wearing. You know what you're looking at. None of this seems to cast any doubt that we have a lot of knowledge of our immediate environment. Or your friend tells you that she's happy. Okay. Testimony. None of this suggests that we know less than the standard view suggests regarding what people tell us, what we read in the newspaper, what we see on the news, and so forth. Memory. The third example has to do with sort of a selective memory bias, but it's not at all clear that this infects our knowledge about what we had for dinner last night, or about the last time we saw our friends and stuff like that. So there's a lot of holes in this argument that the defender of the standard view can really use to kind of undermine the attack on the standard view here. So I would like you to kind of think about that if you're interested. What I'm going to do just in the next 2 minutes here is just give you a little preview of what we're going to call naturalistic epistemology. Okay, here's a little picture of W.V. Quine, Willard Van Orman Quine, a very influential American philosopher from the 20th century. And we're going to talk about two views in natural epistemology, and one of them we're going to call sort of naturalism 1 here, N1. And here's the claim here is that philosophical thinking about knowledge should be abandoned in favor of the empirical study of how people actually go about forming their beliefs. Okay, so the idea here is, we've been thinking of knowledge as justified true belief, maybe plus an extra ingredient that's needed, and then we've been thinking about justification in terms of, properly responding to your experiences, or reasoning well from your basic beliefs, similar things like that. This is all sort of normative. It involves justification. We're evaluating things, justification, reasonable inference, and stuff like that. Naturalists sort of want to get that normativity out of philosophy, so abandon that in favor of the empirical study of how people actually go about forming their beliefs. And the idea kind of lingering under the surface here is that evolutionarily successful belief formation is kind of what we want to study, and in cognitive psychology and evolutionary psychology, that's kind of what we do. By the way, you might remember something like Goldman's causal theory of knowledge. That's something that's kind of goes in the direction of this naturalistic epistemology. On Goldman's causal theory, a proposition when your belief in it is sort of causally connected in some way to the fact that makes it true. So Goldman still thinks that the concept of knowledge is a philosophically useful concept. It shouldn't be abandoned, but he goes about analyzing that really in naturalistic terms. Instead of talking about justification or other normative concepts, he talks about just belief and causation, perception, memory. It's not at all clear that that kind of theoretical perspective can succeed, but it's sort of inspired by this generally naturalistic viewpoint. Okay. This guy, Willard Quine, had an argument for N1, but I'm going to just tease you with that now, haha, and I'm going to pick up here, where I kind of have it again, on the page 2 of the handout, and just talk about naturalistic epistemology for hopefully maybe 20 minutes or so in the next video.